Now that I've finally dug my channel out of that grave that is its identity crisis, let's finally get this Necros Prime build underway. Now before we dive in, it should be noted that this build can work for both the normal and the Prime versions of Necros, but you'll need some extra Forma for the normal version. Even then, the Prime version is still objectively better stat-wise. Anyway, unlike the last Warframe build, let's start off with how to get his parts. The normal version of Necros is easier to get as all of his parts drop from the Lephantis assassination mission on the Orokin Derelict. To access the Derelict, all you need is a key which you can buy the blueprint for from the market for what basically amounts to pocket change in Warframe's economy. The resources used to craft this key are also fairly easy to come by save for the Lephantis nav coordinates which are only obtainable from the Derelict missions. The boss fight itself, while certainly not the hardest in the game, I'm looking at you Jordis, can be a bit tricky to complete without some decent weaponry. Luckily, while you're grinding Necros' parts, you also run the chance of getting one of the only 2 sword and shield stances in the game, as well as a mod that has an integral role to the build I use for Necros, but we'll get to that later. Necros Prime, on the other hand, is a bit of a bitch to grind for, as are most Prime Warframes. Here's a screenshot for the relics that can hold Necros' parts. I'm not going to read them all out. If grinding these relics and void traces is too much for you, then you can buy all the parts off somebody in trade chat. I believe at the time of writing this script, a full Necros set seems to sell for around 100 or so platinum. Now that we're done with that, let's take a look at his abilities and what we're going to be building for. The first of which, if I'm being perfectly honest, being his worst. Soul Punch is a single target knockback ability that forces the soul of its victim out of their body and turns it into a projectile. It sounds edgy as fuck and equally badass, but in reality, it's not very effective by any means aside from the knockback itself. The soul projectile isn't very good at hitting anything unless you aim at an enemy below you, but even then, there are many substantially better alternatives to Necros for knockback crowd control. It can be extremely useful in squad play when you apply an augment to it, but let's save that for when we talk about my second config. Necros does have a better option for crowd control though in the form of his second ability, Terrify. Not only does it force nearby enemies to flee in terror, but it also strips off some of their armor, which combined with the corrosive projection aura mod, and a frame like Oberon who can wipe an entire room's armor in no time, and you have the perfect setup for DPS frames to completely melt any mob with no trouble. Building for the ability though can be a bit awkward since you need range to increase its diameter, and you need strength to increase the number of targets that can be terrified at a time. Next up is the main reason most people take Necros into survival missions and resource farming runs. Desecrate is a passive ability that consumes corpses in exchange for more loot from them. This also applies to targets who are sliced into multiple pieces for even more loot. The mod I mentioned when I was talking about the Lephantis assassination mission plays a key role in how this skill functions with this build, and I'm sure most Necros users know exactly what I'm talking about, but we'll get to that later. Necros' last ability, when modded correctly, can make him a solid tank for most standard mobs. Shadows of the Dead at max rank summons up to 7 undead minions, not including minions certain mobs like Broodmothers can summon, to fight at your side and take aggro away from you. These guys will never go away until they either lose all their health or walk into a nullifier's bubble. While there really isn't anything you can do about a nullifier beyond killing them before they get close, you can repeatedly top off their health by activating the ability again, consuming another 100 energy each time you do so and summoning a replacement for any lost minions. It's also worth noting that any passive abilities your summoned mobs might have had before they died also carries over when they're reanimated. So if you were to summon a healing ancient, you'd also receive their damage reduction buff. Necros also possesses a passive ability that regens a small bit of health for every nearby enemy death, but this is paltry compared to the primary way which you regen health with this build. It's time we finally got to the mod setup for both configs I have for Necros Prime. As I said earlier, a normal Necros will need some extra Forma to fit all these mods, but for my Necros Prime, I used 3 Forma to add 1 Vazarin polarity, or as a veteran would refer to as a D polarity, 1 Naramon, or dash polarity, and another Naramon polarity to the aura slot. Speaking of auras, I felt like I had 2 choices for Necros when it comes to this slot. I could either have passive energy regeneration with Energy Siphon, or a constant armor reduction for all the enemies in the mission with corrosive projection. I opted for the latter since the first config I have for Necros Prime has almost no problems with energy. The next couple of mods were essentially obligatory for any caster frames I have. Those 2 mods are Vitality for the extra health and Primed Flow to maximize my casting potential. Vitality is a relatively common mod that can be obtained through most mod sources, but Primed Flow is the only one that's obtainable through Barrow-Katir, the proverbial Jura of Warframe, or from trade chat. If you intend to buy it from someone, then don't be stupid like me and neglect the fact that primed mods always require a trade tax of 2 million credits. 4 of the remaining mods for this config revolve around the invisible stats mentioned in my previous Warframe build. One of them that's supremely easy to get is Power Drift, which I installed in the Exiles slot. With its small boost to power strength and a bonus knockdown resistance, you can get Power Drift from the Power Challenge on Lua. Getting this room to spawn can be a bit of a pain in the neck, but the challenge itself simply involves feeding your energy to 4 nodes in the room. That's it. I'm not bullshitting you. It's that easy. This next mod, on the other hand, can be a pain in the ass to grind for, as there are many mods of its tier that you can get in its place. Narrow-minded at rank 7 for this config, offering a bonus to power duration and a penalty to power range, is one of the corrupted mods that you can only get through the corrupted doors in the Orokin Derelict. Not only do you need the key to the Derelict mission itself, but you also need one of the 4 corresponding dragon keys for the corrupted door in that mission. The required key is random for each mission, so it's recommended that you run in a squad of 4, each with a different key. It is possible to solo farm these mods by leaving mid-mission if you don't have the correct key, but it will take longer to do, especially if RNGesus isn't on your side. The next 2 mods aren't nearly as annoying to go for though. Both Intensify and Strength can both be obtained through most mod sources. Intensify combined with Power Drift are here to boost the health and damage of my shadows and to increase the number of enemies I can Terrify at once, and Stretch is here to mitigate some of the range penalty of Narrow-minded, putting the max range of Terrify at a healthy 15 meters. Before we get to the 2 augment mods, let's finally talk about the Lephantis exclusive mod that I hinted at several times. Equilibrium, as it's called, will give you some energy for every health orb that you pick up and give you some health for every energy orb you pick up. Alone, it's meh as a mod, since many frames don't really need to rely on that utility for health or energy regen. But it's basically fate that you get this mod from the same source as Necros' parts, because it was deliberately designed to be synonymous with Necros' Desecrate and the augment for that ability. Speaking of augments, I think it's fitting to start with the Desecrate augment, since that's the most important one on this config. Despoil changes the cost of consuming corpses from energy to health. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see exactly how incredible this synergizes with Equilibrium. Desecrate has a seemingly high chance to drop health orbs, and combined with Necros' passive, as long as you keep killing, you have an almost infinite means of health regen as well as the inevitable energy that you get with it. This energy regen also helps you constantly fuel your Shadows of the Dead, since it takes the full cost of the ability to top your minions off, as well as spam the shit out of Terrify. You practically have infinite utility with this build, as you have a constant means of healing, an almost unlimited supply of energy, a ridiculously spammable crowd control ability, and some decent tanking with your Shadows aggro and damage reduction. Actually, I haven't even talked about that last mod in this config. The last mod is another augment that changes Shadows of the Dead. Shield of Shadows binds your summoned minions to you by a thread, and shifts a percentage of the damage dealt to you to your shadows instead. I should write Dr. Seuss. This percentage can be increased by power strength, and with this config, it mitigates over half the damage dealt to you. While it really isn't a requirement for this build, it does provide some extra defense just in case one of those rogue enemies decides that they still want to go after you rather than your minions. Also because fuck those annoying bombard rockets. As I said, I have 2 configs for Necros Prime. The first one is for non-stop utility. The second one shifts Necros from his Necromancer casting style to a pure supportive medic. I won't go in depth with each mod since that would take forever, so I'll just briefly touch up on why I chose certain mods. Vitality, Equilibrium, and Despoil carry on to this config, so I won't waste any time with them. I primarily built this config with Necros' utility skills in mind, so I used Overextended, another corrupted mod, for the range of Terrify, Desecrate, and Soul Punch, and Continuity and Constitution to take care of the duration of Terrify. Yes, I did mention Soul Punch, and there's a good reason for that. The augment Soul Survivor makes it so that Soul Punch siphons all of your— oh my god, oh, so many S's. It siphons all of your energy to bring a downed ally back to their feet. This, combined with the increased range of Desecrate, meaning a larger quantity of health drops from corpses, makes Necros a surprisingly decent medic. Fleeting Expertise, once again another corrupted mod, is here to make sure that you aren't killing yourself with the amount of corpses you consume for loot. Add on the Energy Siphon aura since this config is extremely hungry for energy, and you have a pretty cool substitute for a missing Trinity. I guess there's no better way to end this video than quickly talking about the loadout I typically use with Necros Prime, so let's do that. The primary weapon I chose was one that can quickly mow down smaller enemies while at the same time providing quick burst damage to the more heavily armored targets. All of this so I can make as many shadows as possible. What some people refer to as the poor man's Soma Prime, that weapon is the Tenora rifle. The other 2 weapons weren't all that important, so I went with the Dual Toxicist secondary, which will substantially boost fire rate, reduces recoil, and provides temporary infinite ammo with a headshot, and the Mayo Sword Whip, which was decided on because it looks like something an edgelord would use, but it's actually a decent status weapon. And like that, I think we can finally end this build video. I know it's probably a little late for this one since it was originally meant to be uploaded like a month ago, but as I said earlier, I'm finally out of my identity crisis, so there should be no more problems. Hopefully. Anyway, the next build for Warframe will be the suggested Excalibur. Yes, that is me saying by all means go ahead and leave a suggestion in the comments as to what you would like to see follow Excalibur. And I know I forgot to mention in my previous Xenoverse build, but the one to follow the Ball family will be one from Male Saiyans that I call the Wild Kaioken, and I'll see you in the next video.